Please welcome narrative director Dave Haddock and lead writer Will Weissbaum.
We're going to do a little tradie here.
Oh. That's right, I get the mouse.
Yeah, I get the keyboard. That's how we worked it out backstage.
You get the wand.
I get the wand and
we'll plug in a
this.
thumb drive.
So very excited.
We are so prepared for this. Aww, hecklers. Welcome to Loremaker's Guide to 3.3, the exciting new patch that is eminently going to be available so soon.
Very soon. So I guess we could kind of kick it off.
Any questions? No.
So yes, so as Will said, this is going to be the Loremaker's Guide to 3.3. And we will get this party started. So, no?
I got to select it first.
Oh, there we go. No, we got to start from beginning. There we go.
Hey.
So there's a question. What is Stanton?
What is Stanton?
Stanton is a place. Thank you, guys. All right.
We were so excited to do that.
We were really thrilled. We were chomping at the bit. So we'll kind of kick it off. We'll do kind of a quick overview of Stanton's system in general. Go for it, Will.
So Stanton has a G-type main sequence star. It's very much like our own sun, which is pretty neat. And that provided the right opportunities for an extra wide green zone. And upon discovery, it was pretty exciting to find 3 super Earths and a gas giant, an inner gas giant, which is kind of unusual as well. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, they were all pretty close to being habitable.
Yeah, and so the system itself is credited by Toshi Aaron, who discovered it in 2903. But sort of the interesting thing about it is, though he's credited as discovering it, he actually wasn't the first person there. There were actually some settlers who had kind of moved into the system and were actually kind of starting to set up outposts and stuff like that.
He just made the big mistake of inviting Toshi to the party.
Yeah, and so he basically took the jump data and sold it to the UEE, who walked in and was like, sweet, 3 planets and a gas giant. Let's take that.
So this is coming on the heels, the UE at the time, they've been dumping a lot of credits into the synth world. Mm-hmm. They're a little tore up. They have a whole fight they have going against the Vandul. It's costing a lot of money. And so they see this as a big cash opportunity. So they start getting it ready for the normal land claim sales, kind of like what we're going through recently last year with the Pioneer, where people can start buying plots of lands and estates and stuff like that. But the problem with all that business is that it's kind of a slower way to get money.
Yeah, it's sort of piecemeal. You're only getting kind of like, sections of land sold off at any given time. So as opposed to, if you're looking for sort of a cash infusion, it's a little bit of a slower process.
So on the back end of this, ArcCorp had been trying to lobby in order to be able to purchase a larger plot of land inside this new exciting system. Mm-hmm. And they were kind of going above what was normally allowed to purchase in one lot. And they were pushing for this, and that gave some members in Senate the idea to push for a very exciting business opportunity for some lucky companies.
Yeah, so basically the idea was like they were basically trying to buy a continent. So, ArcCorp, as you know, they make kind of fusion engines and a bunch of other different things. And so one of the things that they were sort of realizing was they were spending a lot of money outsourcing parts and then having those parts be flown into their factories and stuff like that, which is great in theory, but the problem is, as many of you know, flying around, it's dangerous out there. Cargo can get lost or stolen. So what better way to kind of be able to control the products that you need to make your products, but basically like renting that property out to your outsourcers in territory that you control. So then basically it's a very easy kind of hop, skip, and a jump.
Kind of vertical integration moving on.
Yeah, so that was sort of their logic behind it, was that they wanted to try and get some continents so they could basically like sell a lot of property to companies that did work for them so they could make it on site and basically transfer the stuff over, which made it very easy. But obviously, it was a kind of a radical prospect for the Senate.
And so it kind of came forward that rather than just selling these larger plots, why not attempt the near impossible and see if they couldn't get someone to purchase the entire world itself, all the land rights, in one fell swoop, because the influx of credits from that sale would be enormous.
Huge.
And so in tentative talks, ArcCorp decided that they would agree to do such a thing. And all it took left was bringing it to the Senate floor for a wider vote, and there was a big debate. Not everyone was very happy about this idea of a corporatocracy, of allowing corporations to run a government per se on these local worlds. And so there was a lot of debate and some compromises made.
Yeah, it was basically, there are a lot of real kind of moral gray areas with that, because you're basically, it's obviously how do you, a company is sort of responsible to, its responsibilities to its customers, but also to its board and to its directors, and how are they supposed to reconcile being forced to take care of a population? Because, you know, when the chips are down, odds are they're going to go for what's in the best interest of their company rather than what's in the best interest of the people.
I think you can trust companies to take care of people, though. I think
that's true.
like
That's a fair. I'm being unfair. You're right. So yeah, it was a very complicated thing, and then of course once the public found out about it, it was exploded again into this huge debate and stuff like that. Someone's phone?
And so eventually got approval, and they opened up the bidding process, and the 4 winners are the planets that you know today, know and love.
So yeah, kind of a high level overview. Obviously, we're going to talk pretty extensively about Hurston, but these are them in sort of a nutshell. So Crusader, I mean, the interesting thing about Stanton 2, again, is, as Will said, it was a gas giant, which from the UEE's perspective was actually going to be kind of a tricky sell, because obviously it doesn't have ground. So there's not a lot of real sexy selling points to that. And so they had been using it basically as for their sort of naval shipyards and stuff like that. And basically we're sort of even toying with the idea of kind of doing a buy one, get one free type thing to try and entice somebody to take that on. But to Crusader Industries, it was actually incredibly attractive, because the sort of lattice work that had been created by the Navy to service their ships was sort of the perfect thing that they could use to build their sort of massive starliners and transports and stuff like that, because now they could do it in atmosphere, which was really enticing to them.
And then the next planet, Stanton 3, was purchased by ArcCorp, and they immediately started construction almost day one as soon as they could move into the system. And as you've seen from flybys over the planet, the amount of development they have is kind of ridiculous.
Kind of ridiculous, yeah. They turned into basically a big business park. So basically sold it to, you know, retail space, production facilities, all of the stuff that they need to do, but also even competitors, they'll rent to anybody. They really do not care. We sort of, I always kind of in my own mind use this sort of the cyberpunky urban sprawl, where it's like massive advertising all over the place type thing, where it's sort of neon
transparent
jungle.
umbrellas. And then from moving out to the very edge of the green zone, we have our last super Earth, which is Microtech, which the climate is freezing cold, but that ended up being ideal for Microtech to purchase, because they wanted to build huge data servers underneath the frozen ground. It was able to keep it cool, and it was ideal for them, as well as having a lot of the resources they needed for their advanced materials to build their computer chips. So again, another ideal situation. And Microtech had the money to do it, because everyone has a Moby glass.
Literally everyone has. That was sort of the 4 plans.
And you can see like a kind of an interesting balance that we tried to bring to it when we were coming up with the notion of Stanton, of this kind of system where it was looking at corporations kind of run amok, like all the different flavors of it kind of boil down.
You kind of tend to hear, if you see, Josh or Jeremiah or any of the character people talking about sort of setting up silhouettes and putting silhouettes next to each other to see how they look, how their form looks distinct from each other, and how their characters pop. And it was sort of the same thing with this. Is you have, right here you have 4 corporations who have 4 very different outlooks on how they treat their workers, how they treat their environment, how they treat their products, and stuff like that. So they all felt, we tried to want to make them all very unique and pop and exciting and fun. And some of them are very cool, and some of them are very dark, which we're going to get to right now. Cool. Which I need to do. Bink. First off, we're going to talk about the big boys in the room, Hurston Dynamics.
So before we get into the planet itself, we wanted to give you a little backstory to the company, and Hurston has a lot of history behind it. I think outside of the Mesters, they're one of our longest dynastic families in lore so far. And so they can trace their history way back to the 25th century, and they're predominantly known now for being a weapons manufacturer, as well as they make warheads, and they also make a lot of weapon parts and advanced materials that they sell to other manufacturers, which is how they made their fortune. But that wasn't what they always did. They got their start in 2438 from Solomon Hurston, was kind of a middleman contractor, was how he made his living. He would seek out open military contracts, get them to give it to him, and then source out what they were looking for. So if the military was ordering 1,000 bullets, which isn't that many bullets, I don't know, like 2,000 bullets. He would go out, he would be like, I can get you those, go out, buy some bullets, and resell them to the military for margin of profit.
Markup, yeah.
And so he was doing that and making a pretty good living at it. And right around the same time was when we had our first contact with an alien species. And that kind of, even though they ended up being friendly and everyone was really happy about meeting the Banu for the first time, tensions were kind of high on the military front about like, well, are they always going to be friendly?
It opened up a lot of weird doors, because it's like, yeah, they're friendly now, but who knows, in 10 years, maybe we'll say something that really, annoys them, and things might go bad. So the stakes were significantly raised for kind of preparing ourselves just in case things went really, really off.
Which, good news for Solomon, meant a lot of more military contracts suddenly on the rise.
Yeah.
And there was this awesome one. They were seeking to build new orbital defense platforms, and they needed laser weapons for it. And he was trying desperately to get that contract and source it out. And he ended up figuring out the best way for him to do it was to invest heavily in a manufacturing company that was going out of business and getting them to fulfill the order by purchasing it himself. And so he took the plunge, and that was the start of Hurston Dynamics,
right.
Was just trying to fulfill this contract.
So it was sort of a weird company where their sort of early days were actually primarily filled with doing government contracts. So the public didn't actually know much about them. They were very kind of behind the scenes type company, and so he was basically snatching up as many contracts as he could, trying to find kind of cheap outsourcers to get the materials so he could get his kind of the best profit margin once he kind of turned it around and sold it back to the government.
And funnily enough, as much as he was about getting money from the government, he was really dedicated to not giving it back. And so he tried very hard. His big thing was about leaving stuff for his children and his family. So very early on, as he built out his company, he hired only family to work there and ensured that they were taking over. But what was interesting, it wasn't just pure nepotism, right?
No. I mean, one of the things that particularly you'll notice once you kind of start wandering around Lorville and Hurston in general is, and dealing more with the companies, you're going to see a lot of family names popping up. And so the idea with them was that it wasn't just, oh, this is my son, I'm going to give him a cushy VP job and everything's fine. He was sort of exceedingly paranoid and was about losing his money. So the idea was that he would install members of his family in various positions within the company, so they would elevate within that position. So if they were in a position to take over, he could be confident that they knew what they were doing. Because the last thing he wanted to do was to destroy his legacy by installing an idiot who would just drive the company into the ground because they're like, I like cars, and spend all their money doing that.
So yeah, like people would start at the bottom in the Hurston company and have to like fight their way up to the top of Dynamics, which started a lot of family drama over the years, kind of like an episode of Dallas or something with a lot of backstabbing.
Which was a huge inspiration on the game in general. Dallas.
Take that, Austin. No. From there, they kept on expanding out, performing more contracts and taking over more manufacturing and changing it up as they saw fit, always seeking that next way to cash in. And the business passed from family member to family member.
Yeah.
And in seeking, it's a slim margin business, and so they tried to find any way they could to increase their profits.
Yeah.
And they learned early on, after a terrible accident involving a railgun misfiring and several people dying, that the one thing they couldn't skimp on was the quality of their products. And so like that was a big thing that was started in the beginning of their life as a company, is the product has to be good or else we're not going to last. But everything else we can cut corners on.
That was the trade-off, was that they were like, the gun will be great, but we will do whatever we can to skimp out on the workers. We will do whatever we can to skimp out on their sort of any kind of amenities, benefits, stuff like that. And we will cut costs wherever we could, except for anything that would show up in the actual practical weapon.
Yeah, so like the claim to fame for the one CEO at the time, Ariel Hurston, was that they came up with their new contract system.
Yeah.
Where they would kind of, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, it was basically, it was kind of, and if you listen closely to a lot of the PA announcements, you can kind of hear elements of this. But the idea was just that he created a kind of insidious work contract that would sort of lock people in to these like really, really long work periods, but it was conditioned in such a way that it was very difficult for them to get out of it. So it was sort of like indentured servitude type thing, where it was people who were very desperate, who were in debt. They would kind of go out, headhunt people who they thought that they could snag, with the idea of like, hey, we'll give you 10 grand right off the bat, and plus you have a job. You just you'll owe us that 10 grand, and then you'll have to work it off. And so for a lot of these people, it was very tempting, because again, if they needed money badly enough, they would take that lifeline. But it would put them in a position where it was almost impossible for them to get out. So it wasn't strictly illegal, it was just tremendously unethical.
Yeah, and Hurston always went with an ask for forgiveness policy. So they would skirt the law as much as they could, do stuff wrong, and if they got caught, they would say sorry and pay the fine. But usually, they had saved enough money at the front to make that worthwhile.
Yeah, and again, the products were really good. So
the connections with the military for making these awesome weaponry, they were kind of willing to forgive and forget.
The government's like, you really shouldn't do that, and they're like, all right, we'll think about it, and then
So at this time, Hurston started to get well known, but mostly because of the protests against their polluting practices and their labor violations. So they were kind of getting that negative connotation associated with them.
Yeah.
So for years, they worked very closely with the military, and when Messer came into power, they aligned themselves very closely with his family as well, and things were going great for a long time, and then the Messers were overthrown and kicked out of power.
Yeah. So unlike kind of Aegis, they had a lot of military contracts that were now sort of up in the air, because the government was like, we're not sure about this and sure about you guys and stuff like that. And so their future was in a little bit of jeopardy. At least their sort of primary source of income was in a lot of danger. And so they actually, for the first time, started to sell directly to civilians. So this was the first time that they kind of opened up the civilian market and started to sell guns directly to people, regular people.
And this was a big deal because they had created a few years earlier their Cascade technology, which was kind of their proprietary weapon technology, which was only available for the military until this time, and they started making it available to the public. And the kind of idea behind Cascade technology is that it starts transferring, the longer you fire weapons, the more heat builds up, and they're able to transfer that into extra damage. And you'll be able to start seeing that actually in 3.3. There's a new line of Hurston weapons.
Sort of utilize that.
I totally blanked on their names, and now I'm trying to look it up and I can't find it. Anyway, there's two of them. One's a scattergun, one's
the
a
attrition repeater and the dominant?
Attrition repeater and the dominant scattergun, thank you. And so those will be in 3.3, check them out.
Yeah.
Really cool.
So unfortunately, while their sort of future was in jeopardy, Vandal hostilities started to increase. And so the government, which again, this is recently after the Messers fell, were kind of on shaky ground. They were still trying to kind of rebuild and stuff. And so having increased alien hostilities was not the best time. It was very inconvenient for them. So basically they kind of fell back into some bad contracts because they needed weapons for their military and stuff like that. So Hurston was able to get some of their government contract work back, not nearly as much as they had before, but they had sort of already tasted the joy of selling directly to civilians. So now they had kind of two income streams. So they were kind of back in business making money.
But the products they're making, though, are still very much kind of a niche market a little bit. They're complicated, they're finicky, they take skill to use. And so they're usually pilots who have military experience or who like a trickier weapon that can perform better, but you have to like ride that line when you're using it, which makes it interesting between like overheating and being able to fight. And so it's kind of got a reputation as like a fighter pilot's brand.
Kind of a dangerous skill-based weapon type thing.
But with the Vandal attacking, they got their next big break in earning a contract to start producing antimatter warheads for the government. And what they found out quickly, though, is that the major choke point in them making profits off this was antimatter. Refined antimatter is hard to come by, and the process of refining it is extremely dangerous. Early on, they tried to take over Quarterdeck Prison, which is one of the largest antimatter refineries. If you might have read about this in lore, or I'll tell you about it right now in Loremakers.
If you wait a few seconds, you'll hear the answer.
So, the Quarterdeck Prison has an antimatter refinery there, and the take time off of prisoners' sentences if they agree to work in the refinery, just to give you a sense of how awful
Incredibly
and dangerous
it is, yeah.
And they've even petitioned to try to open up their own refinery, but no planet really wanted Hurston opening up a refinery in their backyard.
Yeah, again, they have a bad history of pollution and just kind of being not good. So everyone was sort of like, yeah.
So roll a few years, and one of the executives, Magda Hurston, heard about the Stanton auction beforehand and managed to convince the board to place a bid on it. And Stanton would provide them with a very perfect opportunity to continue to expand their business.
Yeah, so the idea being that if they bought a planet, then they could set up their own production facilities, and they were now the law of the planet. So they could kind of dictate, obviously, they had to stay within UEE common laws, but the idea being that like they're basically creating these factories for themselves on their territory, so they can kind of get away with a lot more than most places.
So they bought a planet.
There you go. Super pretty. So that was part of the savanna that you saw earlier. The more common view is that. So that's sort of after. But yeah, so again, the planet itself was a super Earth, rocky core, or rocky world with metal core, magnetic field.
Everything you want to look for when you're buying a planet.
Yeah,
really.
If you're out looking right now, that's what you want. Required very little terraforming to be habitable, so just kind of adjusting the atmosphere to make it a little bit more breathable, as well as kind of seeding some of the plant life that you saw there.
Yeah, as part of keeping like the terraformed engine going of maintaining the atmosphere, they usually seed the world with some base flora and fauna, and so that's a lot of what you see on the world is a side effect of that. But they shouldn't have really bothered, because once Hurston got their hands of it, it's kind of gone downhill pretty fast.
Yeah, so they basically immediately started to aggressively strip mine, kind of rip out whatever resources they possibly could from the planet. They do weapons testing on their own planet.
Like from orbital platforms bombarding the surface.
Yeah, they do not care. They store industrial waste underground, which you saw slightly in the demo.
And not very well.
Not well at all.
And so like the question is, why would Hurston go through the lengths of purchasing this very expensive planet to just kind of ruin it really fast? And the idea is that the investment that they made is worth the most right now. It's depreciating over time. What if more planets are discovered? What if there's a big influx of that resource in the market? Did it cut out?
Oh, did you?
Oh.
Can you hear us?
Oh, okay.
Sweet.
We're back.
I'm back, thank you.
Awesome, there we go.
And so, what if more planets come on sale? So basically, they're trying to milk every credit they can right now as fast as possible, and then invest that money that they make heavily in order to prepare for the future.
Yeah, and part of the fallout from it is that even parts of the planet are sort of reverting back to its original state, because there are so many pollutants and toxins in the air that it's become this very kind of, it's not really, it's technically habitable, but it's not great to live on.
But they're still beautiful places, and those are usually the kind of things where you'll find Hurston executives vacationing in like a nice savanna and stuff like that, staying away from the places that look like this. So there we go. So when they were doing the scanning and figuring out the resources and what they're going to do and how they were going to divide up the planet, there was a large swath of land that didn't have any really mineable resources, anything that they wanted to do with it. So they decided what better use for this useless land than to build a really big building on it.
So that became that.
Welcome to Lorville.
Welcome to Lorville. I don't know if you guys probably missed, I don't know if you saw Ian's presentation and the environment guys. I think the actual building is 4 kilometers tall, something like that, which is nuts and / awesome. So Lorville is, again, sort of the capital city on Hurston. And it's a sort of a massive, sprawling factories, business yards, storage centers, block housing, all sorts of things there. And sort of the original idea behind it, when we were thinking about it sort of conceptually, was this idea of company towns from the Industrial Revolution. So that sort of idea of there would be mining companies that would set up would buy a sort of a mine, and then they would build a town around it for their workers to go there, and then the mining company would own the general store that the people would shop at. They would build the houses that the people would buy. They would basically own all of the amenities. So the money that you spent, that you earned, would go directly right back to the company to refuel them. So it was that type of thing. They are much more insidious about it, but it's that idea of like, that's why it's so difficult to get away from these people, is that they get their hooks in you and they just bleed you dry.
So even when other companies or stores are operating out of Lorville, they're still paying Hurston a large chunk of operating fees in order to be there. And so that money flow that goes out from the workers just comes right back in. So this is Central Tower.
Yeah.
It's kind of the center core building of the whole city. And you can see that kind of Hurston wants to have a presence and let everyone there know that they're...
So this is their central headquarters, basically. And the idea being that, like basically wherever you are in the city, you will see this. So it's just this sort of constant, ever-present reminder that Hurston is there kind of looking down on you.
And all the main executive business operations happen out of this building.
Yeah.
And as Todd mentioned in the demo, or the keynote, that this is right where the business district is, which is not coming yet for 3.3, but hopefully in 3.4 we're going to open that up and allow you to hobnob with some people in fancy suits.
Yeah, and the idea being that, as you saw in the keynote, that the workers area was very downtrodden and kind of awful. But we really want to play with this idea that once you get to the central business district, it's a very different vibe, that they treat their executives and the wealthy there very, very differently than they treat the workers. So that disparity becomes really apparent, which should be sweet.
So where most of you will first encounter Lorville is through...
Oh.
Mike? Oh.
Check a microphone.
I can scream at you. Oh, am I back?
Oh.
Hello again.
This is not...
Oh, did it stop?
It's not moving forward.
Did the wand die?
Did it die? Really? It's not moving.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Where's? Can you read the arrows? No, that's just doing this. All right, wait. We're gonna awkwardly do this.
There we go. Okay.
Yay.
Sweet. It's back. So most likely the place you will kind of start off when you land is TEASA Spaceport, which is very pretty. And it's basically, the idea is, again, like that notion that everything in Lorville is owned by Hurston in some capacity. So you might see some familiar names of stores that you know and love, but those are franchises that are owned by Hurston Dynamics, who are just using their names to kind of pull you in. So TEASA Spaceport, for example, is sort of operated by Archimedes Flight, which will be a sort of landing service company that you'll sort of see elsewhere in the universe, but this is a franchise that's owned by Hurston, so you're paying Hurston when you land.
And what I really want to call out a special attention to this picture, because I just love picturing where those two are off to today. They have like such a big adventure ahead of them, I know it.
It's a bright new day. And actually, they're staring at a hammerhead, so I'm sure it's going to be violent too.
So also, like to the right there, you see the hammerhead. That's sitting at the New Deal lot, which also you saw in the keynote today. So we have our very first ship dealership coming in, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
And also on top of that, there's going to be ship rentals from Vantage Rental, which is one of our new ship rental brands. And we have a couple of those that we'll be dealing out as we expand.
Yeah.
But different tiers of rentals.
So then basically you land here, you can sort out some business here, but obviously if you need to get to sort of the main part of town, there's shipyard, you will need to go through the transit system, which was a very, very exciting thing to show off today, and we're very proud about. Because yes, it's actually a train system. You have to ride the subway. And it was actually a kind of an important part that we wanted to delve into, aside from kind of the really cool tech of like, hearing designers talk about having to actually kind of lay track for these trains to go throughout the city, was this fact of there's a lot of moments that we can kind of use in these trains, where it's you riding with, shoulder to shoulder. I don't know how many of you have ever ridden a New York subway, but it's a very unique experience because you're shoulder to shoulder with a lot of different types of people from all walks of life and stuff like that. And so the possibilities, sort of the narrative possibilities of riding on this subway train with people who are going to work, who are kind of talking about their, the Murray Cup race that they watched last night, that type of thing, just gives you a real nice flavor for the tone of the workers in this city, which would be really fun.
And it's about that interaction and immersion. Like, we could do things where you just arrive there, or even like in the shops when you go in, like that, you could just go to a terminal, but we also give you that option of going up to the shelf and looking at the items. Now we'll touch on this later with our new rest stops, rather than just touching down, fueling up and taking off, you touch down, you get out of your ship, you go in and have interaction. So it's kind of always just driving players to have these experiences and to get more immersed into the world. And CR has been really supportive of that vision, which is great.
Yeah. So the sort of main area that you'll go to, and you can see the map, and this map is actually technically accurate.
Oh, sorry, real quick, Dave. CR stands for Chris Roberts.
Oh, yes. I don't know if you've heard of him. So the L9 residences, so this is basically the tower block that we opened up in the keynote, which was very exciting. And again, it's sort of the first playing with like kind of permanent, residences. So, a lot of really cool kind of thought and tech has gone into this type of thing, because there is that, that push for the persistence of I can have a messy apartment type of thing. And so this would be sort of your hab. So this is very different than like the easy habs that you go to, which are more kind of temporary hotel type accommodations. This would be something that would be technically yours. Very soon in the future, hopefully you'll have a tough choice of deciding where you want to rent a hab, where do you want to call home. For now we're going to have Lorville available to live at, but down the road there'll be more choices and stuff, which will be really cool. Or you can just be kind of a road warrior and just rent a hotel when you need to, or sleep in the back of your ship. Yeah. So it's kind of fun options. And so part of the idea, as you saw kind of walking through, it was sort of this living space. Part of the idea behind it was that Hurston would want to provide kind of cheap worker accommodations deep in the heart of the city, because then they would lose less time having workers transfer to their factories. So they didn't have to worry about a commute time, they didn't have to worry about people being late, or they could minimize it basically. And so that's why you'll see a lot of these like kind of cheap kind of A-frame living structures kind of peppered throughout the city. So next, L19 is located around LEAVSDEN Square, which is our sort of main common area of the workers area. So this is where you see a lot of the workers. Obviously, there was a lot of kind of crap floating in the air, which was some of the sort of toxins and whatnot. And you also saw a lot of dudes with guns, which we'll get into a little bit later.
Transitioning kind of like out of the habs into kind of the central square, you'll start getting that feeling of that big brotherness that we want to go in. There's catwalks above with security walking on it. There's cameras placed all around that you'll notice. Friendly messaging and everything.
Yeah, just super friendly.
Just kind of trying to keep that oppressive tone going around any corner. And the art guys did absolutely fantastic with that.
Yeah, no, it's really stunning. And there was the central tower of it, not central, the HQ, but there's a central security tower that kind of looks down that has spotlights and stuff like that, where they kind of will keep an eye on everybody.
So away from those like pockets of oppression, those main areas, you kind of go off into these separate things. Like when you're coming out of habs, you might have noticed in the keynote that there was like a pool table and some people hanging out. So like that's a safer space. And as you hurry through LEAVSDEN, the air is bad, you're trying to get out from the watch. And that's where you head to places like our next location, M&V Bar.
Yep, McIntyre and Victor is sort of a workers miners bar, and factory workers, miners, people basically kind of blowing off steam before they head home. Kind of rough and tumble. It was interesting because originally the pitch for the bar of Lorville was a place called Viola's, which was going to be this named after a Hurston, super like very stuffy, kind of like uncomfortable, unwelcoming place with a very snooty bartender. But in talking with design and art, they were sort of this thing about like they wanted to make it more kind of worker friendly, and it ended up being a nice shift because again it's sort of feeding into that sort of insidious nature of Hurston of they own this bar and the people that are drinking there are using their wages to give back to Hurston in another way. So it's kind of another level of uncomfortableness, which is fun. But yeah, there's also one of the things you'll kind of notice in this space is while it's themed as a very worker-friendly bar, you still have to be kind of careful of what you're complaining about because there are people who kind of
Someone's always listening.
Someone's listening and might rat you out. So moving on. Reclamation disposal. This was a real fun. You got to meet one of our new mission givers here. Is a scrapyard. Basically, it's just a kind of a junkyard, kind of the equivalent of like a dumper's depot type deal. And we'll kind of get into Clovis a little bit later. But this is where you would go if you wanted to sell some extra scrap or some salvage that you had found and stuff like that. But also you can go there to pick up jobs, which is really fun. And
the massive city gates.
Yes.
So again, on this tone of control and oppression, and that's very thematic to Hurston, is we have these walls that surround the entire city. And even to get into the city, approaching, and this was kind of fun because we didn't only consider the approach of what it was like to get in a vehicle, it was also about what was the approach like when you're driving up. And so you come into these gates and immediately it's these big barricades, it's the security guards, it's going through those scanners. Mm-hmm. And also we're kind of talking about the gates as being these kind of congregation points of the outside elements with the people inside.
Yeah.
So you do have people that live out in the wilds of Hurston versus the workers, and this is kind of where the crossover with each other.
Yeah, and we're going to accelerate because we are rapidly running out of time. But we'll very quickly talk about sort of the people that you come across in Hurston. So again, building the kind of the environments and stuff like that is really cool and is really coming a long way. But how the people interact and the dynamics between them is where we get kind of a lot of our fun kind of story moments. So you're familiar with the guy with the plastic bag on his head. And to reiterate, Chris is saying do not cosplay this. Be very careful. But the workers obviously are a very important part of Hurston's lifeblood because they are the ones who are basically making them the money.
And there's a real mix of, even amongst the workers. It's a really hard job, but what Hurston does is it gives a job to a lot of. Oh, I'm gone again.
Damn.
I just have it. Oh, is that what's happening? Oh, hello. It gives a job to a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't have a job. Mm-hmm. These are people in severe debt who've just overcome addiction problems, who are ex-cons. They can all get a contract with Hurston, and Hurston gives them a paycheck, gives them a roof over their heads, and provides them a life. So for a lot of people, that's really great, and they know what they're doing for their next 25 years. Like at a lot of other places, maybe you only work 3 months and you're out of job and you're scrambling again. Mm-hmm. You work for Hurston, you know what you're doing every day.
They're an established company that has been around for 500 years, so you know that pretty much they're going to be around for...
But like what Dave alluded to earlier, some people take this when they're at a low point and they don't quite understand the implications, or the job isn't quite what they were promised. And so then we start having a group of workers who are kind of angry about their situation.
And dissatisfied and are looking for equal, fair treatment and stuff like that, which will be an interesting narrative that we're going to pursue.
Yeah, in future patches, we're just going to start developing that more, and that'll be a source of missions and stuff.
Yeah, but obviously their sort of first obstacle in that regard is Hurston security. So part of the idea with these guys, we worked with the character team on developing a kind of a unique armor skin for them, and part of the idea was that these guys are sort of stormtroopery. You can't see their faces. They're very dehumanized. The idea being that they are there to represent Hurston authority. This is not Jimmy who lives down the block who works security or something like that. This is a thing. This is a force of nature. This is Hurston's will and corporate policy.
Yeah, they don't sleep in L19. They have their own kind of section of the city that they sleep in and then report out to the workers' areas.
Yeah, and so their job is to basically, like, again, execute Hurston will and crack down on any kind of dissent. And one of the distinctions that we kind of made when we were approaching this group was that we didn't want them to feel sadistic. It wasn't that they were taking pleasure in kind of cracking down on people, but it was just this kind of almost pure professionalism of they're going to move quickly and swiftly and effectively to subdue any kind of dissent or whatever. And
yeah, they only have that like one setting.
Yeah, they don't. And again, they're not relishing it. They're not like, you know, chomping at the bit to kind of like go crack heads or anything like that. Like, but they will shut people down. That is part of their job.
And they're not there to investigate like normal crimes. They're there to represent Hurston's as a company's interests and protect that at all costs.
Yeah, but yeah, we're getting, I mean, just to kind of briefly talk about, we're getting some really cool, we've been working with the design team to kind of work out really fun behaviors so they'll still have personalities to the extent of like, they will have a methodology and a behavior that feels kind of unique and fun and interesting.
So yeah, we're getting the first iteration of them in 3.3, and then that'll continue to develop, especially as like green zones and armistice zones are lifted and start relying more on kind of security personnel to keep law and order, which will be really fun to see how that works out.
So next, oh no, what's going on?
Clovis, yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, it's right there.
Is it? Wow, okay. Interesting. Well, we'll hold off on him for a second. But two of the other populations that you'll kind of, we're sort of working on getting in will be probably in 3-4-ish is what we're aiming for. The executives, which we mentioned earlier, who you'll find in sort of the central business district, who are going to feel very different than the workers, obviously, because they're sort of, I mean, they're probably obviously stressed in their own lives because they live in this sort of Machiavellian corporate nightmare, but they have money. And the workers don't.
And a lot of them have the last name Hurston.
That is true. And then there was the sort of the homeless population, which would be the ones that Will alluded to, that would be living outside of the city. And the idea being that basically there's not a lot of homeless actually inside the walls of Lorville, that if you aren't working for them, then you are out. Like, they will kick you out. And so we're trying to work with design to kind of have them be congregated around the city gates. So you will pass them as you're kind of coming in and out of the city on the ground, but that's where you'll sort of see them, or you'll see them out in sort of the wilds, kind of living
establishing like shanty towns out in trash heaps, which if you guys watch ATV, you might have seen an early concept for that kind of trash shanty town, which was really cool.
So now we'll jump to Clovis.
Hello, Clovis.
Hey, Clovis. He's sort of our new mission giver. You can find him in Reclamation and Disposal. We'll probably not talk too much about him because the idea is that we want you to kind of go and experience him for yourself. But yeah, he was an interesting one because we worked very closely with the design team to try and, when kind of constructing these mission givers, part of it is about making a fun character and stuff like that, but also it's about creating a character who's fulfilling a kind of a design and a gameplay need, who's there to kind of send players to areas that we want them to go to and stuff like that. And so Clovis, again, he works in sort of a salvage yard, so his stuff is sort of themed in that world. But yeah, he's very fun, and the actor was really great. So we're really excited to see you guys meet him. Okay, so
we have all these characters, and so we introduced some new clothing styles for them to be wearing. The most noticeable is the Geisen Ready Up bag helmet portable environment.
Yeah, if you are a subscriber, you've read we did a profile on them last month. They are, needless to say, they make dirt cheap products that are not good. Obviously, you look at that and you do not go, this is a really smartly designed concept.
One thing to get in before we move on, since we are running out of time, is the environmental effect on the characters themselves. And this is something, again, a little bit farther down the road, but we've been talking with the character team about it, and it's pretty cool is being able to see someone and know where they live. And so with Hurston, the example of this is with all the dust storms they have, with all the toxicity in the air, is that it actually affects their skin that's exposed. So they'll get like on their wrists or their necks, if it gets exposed to the air, kind of a discoloration.
Discoloration.
Almost like a farmer's tan, but just from the environment of Hurston alone. So if someone spends enough time there and then leaves, eventually you'd be able to see those markings and ID them as someone who
you would know that, like, and also it's a sign of class too, because the idea that the workers might have more patches of stained skin and stuff like that, but the wealthy would not.
Yeah, when you go into M&V and they take off that coat, they'll have that, forearm stain.
But you go to the Central Business District and it's people wearing, showing a lot of skin to showcase the fact that they are not, out in the elements and stuff like that. So another big aspect of it was part of building the environment was actually kind of determining the voice of Hurston, which you'll see in a lot of the PA announcements as well as the billboards that are very helpful, and everyone should absolutely abide by when you're there. But again, one of the things, when we're talking about a dystopian corporatocracy type thing, but one of the things that was kind of fun when coming up with these was we wanted to make it seem like you were on their team, like they were talking to you like you were really like their buddy and you're all really working towards a great future, even though they're abusing the hell out of you. So a lot of these things are very like, education leads to innovation. Enroll your children in Hurston's exciting new equivalency program. It's just like really awful if you think about it. Building the future, we can't do it without you. Like, it's just, it's depressing, but awesome.
Dave was just excitedly turning around telling me about these as he thought of them.
I was so thrilled. I was so happy. So the other aspect that you'll see, obviously, that with Hurston is the moons. We'll kind of skimp over this because it's
new moons to explore. They got cool biomes. It was more about
all named after Hurston. So Ariel Hurston, the one who came up with that really awful work contract. Aberdeen Hurston, who had come up with the antimatter refinement process for the ordnance.
Magda was the one who convinced the board to buy Stanton in the first place.
And Ida Hurston was a family member who died in the first Tavaran War, and so they basically, hold up this person as like, this is why we make the guns we make, to not let, wonderful people like Ida die in awful wars. All right, so we're going to go on super fast because we are...
Final stretch, but that's
Final
okay.
stretch. So
the rest of Stanton.
The rest of Stanton. Rest stops, obviously, has been a big topic of conversation. There is actually a portfolio on them if you really want to dig into the lore of them, but the idea being that these are sort of rest stops. It's pretty self-explanatory.
Modular, ubiquitous. They're kind of, for the time being, replacing cryo-astro stations with, again, that idea of engagement that when you land to refuel, rearm, and repair, that you can get out of your ship for a little while and go in and experience some shopping. I'm going to take it out of my pocket, and we'll see if that does any better. And hang out there.
Yeah. So it's that sort of, it's tapping into, these are kind of replacing the cryoastros, so you would stop here, kind of stretch your legs. There'd be sort of minimal amenities and stuff like that. I don't know if anyone's ever been to Iowa 80. That was a lot of Google pictures of that being thrown around. But one of the things that it also led to was this sort of concept of Lagrange points. Which was where were we going to place these things? Because they also serve a function of, if you need to replenish quantum fuel and stuff like that, where do we put these things? Because they need to be in a place that's convenient for you to be able to stop and refuel. And so Will came up with the idea of actually utilizing Lagrange points as a way to place these things almost systematically. And he worked with Luke Presley in the UK.
I love the idea and thankfully ran with it, and so we're getting it in. So this kind of neat orbiting, and it gives us almost a season in space, because a rest stop at one point might be between these really busy points of traffic during the orbital path, and it'll be crowded, but then as it swings out wide, it's going to become, very underpopulated because it's no longer on that main
convenient
shipping route.
Thoroughfare. But imagine this sort of, the gray circle here is the orbit, and so all of these things would just sort of stay on this pattern as they kind of spin around the sun. And so the beautiful thing about it, and again, if you've been trying to fly to LEAVSDEN and you've had a planet in your way, is really problematic because you have to kind of figure out how you can quantum around. And so the idea with this is that you could be, have a sun between you and the planet, and you could set a quantum for L5 or L4, and that would bounce you you could easily kind of bounce to it. And so these areas, like all the L's, would basically be little gravity wells where you could kind of plop civilization, and that we knew people would kind of bottleneck there, which was really exciting.
So you'll be able to check out the R&R inside the Crusaders L2 point.
Yeah.
That's really fun.
It's very cool stuff.
So that's the new one, and then the other big new addition is...
Recco Battaglia. We have a new mission giver who is currently going to be in LEAVSDEN, but LEAVSDEN is going to switch, eventually when we switch LEAVSDEN to the AR Regency, once LEAVSDEN goes back to the system it's supposed to be in, Recco will stay. But again, going back to what we were saying earlier about how building these mission givers to not only fulfill kind of fun character moments, but also sort of new gameplay stuff, Recco works as sort of she organizes a sort of...
logistics rep.
Yeah, she's a logistics rep for like kind of a collective of miners. So she organizes kind of transports and kind of helps them out and provides support for them. So the idea is that we were going to kind of hook her into sort of the mining adjacent type mission stuff. As that started to come online, she became a good candidate to kind of push to the forefront. And then... so yeah, finally, I guess in conclusion, we finally, after all of that we've just kind of burned through, we finally have now come back to the statement of Stanton is a place. Thank you all.